Welcome to Washington in Focus, your source for the week's top stories in the state of Washington. I'm Cole Lauterbach, managing editor of the Center Square Newswire service. This week, we'll be discussing the uncertain future of natural gas in Washington, a now infamous case of a squatter in suburban Bellevue and how much his push to illegally stay in his home is costing taxpayers, a federal lawsuit seeking to force the government's hand in protecting gray wolves, and a new survey of taxpayers in Seattle hints that the famously progressive city may have seen enough on their property tax bill. That's ahead on Washington in Focus. I'm Cole Lauterbach.
Some people would call him a loser. He ran for state office. He was beaten. He started a business. He failed. He ran for Congress. He lost. He was nominated for vice president. He lost again. But he knew only those who never tried are the real losers. And Abraham Lincoln was no loser. Persistence. Pass it on. From the Foundation for a Better Life at values.com.
Welcome back to Washington in Focus. I'm Cole Lauterbach. Now, let's jump into the headlines. Washington-based environmentalists have long sought to phase out the use of natural gas in homes to lower the state's carbon emissions. The new step came in the form of legislation enacted last month. The new law is complex, but one thing no one can agree on seems to be whether it's the measure that will be pointed to when people are denied a gas line to their new or existing homes. Investigative reporter TJ Martinell had this one. TJ, what does this latest law do?
In really basic terms, what this law does is it consolidates the planning that PSC has to do for its electrical and natural gas plans under the 2019 Clean Energy Transformation Act. And these plans have to be submitted to the State Transportation and Utilities Commission, which regulates the utilities in the state.
Between this law and the one that was already passed in, you said 2019, critics say the law bans natural gas in homes, that this one does. Now, is that accurate or is it the other one?
It's a question of, does it explicitly ban natural gas or concern natural gas? No, it does not. But what critics are arguing is that it is going to set the stage and will inevitably lead to a end of natural gas by Puget Sound Energy. And the argument specifically is that they could put together a plan in the future that calls for ending their business in the natural gas sector. And that could be approved by the State Transportation and Utilities Commission by going to the state legislature and saying, hey, in order to comply with this law, we need to do this, and it's more cost effective for us, but we need you to change this law. And so that's what they're arguing, is that it doesn't explicitly do it, but it paves the route towards that, and that is the end destination.
Right. One of the ways you explained it to me in the past was saying that this does not explicitly say utilities, you have to stop using natural gas, but it does place a required goal in terms of carbon footprint that pretty much the only way of reaching it is to phase out natural gas in homes. And this was laid out, I mean, a couple times by there was a Republican lawmaker that had an op-ed that said as much as that. But PSC pushed back on the notion pretty hard once this bill was signed into law, correct?
Yes, and I reached out to them and they said that they have no intention of ending natural gas service and that that's not going to be part of their planning. They also noted something that for people who aren't involved in the energy sector or utilities, they may not catch up on this, but the 2019 law concerns electricity and power plants. It does not concern how people heat and provide cooking and heating in their homes. So that 2019 law doesn't affect natural gas if you're using it for heating and cooking. So they would not be required to end that in order to comply with this law unless they were using it to generate electricity, which for many people who rely on natural gas, they don't rely on it to light their homes. The other interesting part is that it seems like the only thing that actually is banning natural gas is for future use, and it's through the State Building Code Council's latest updated code.
Right. That's the legal challenge to this that's going along kind of congruently with these new laws and new guidelines for PSC, correct?
Yes. What it's going to do is it's going to make it not illegal, impractical. It's going to make it impractical, according to critics, for builders to build new residential or commercial structures with natural gas. So they're going to be forced to use another source for heating and cooking, or for whatever uses. They're not going to be able to put it into new construction. And so the only thing that's certain at this point is that if this new code is upheld in the court, there will be little, if any, new buildings built with natural gas in it.
And all this leads to just more electric, right? Presumably, I mean, because there's really no other reasonable ways of heating, your homes or businesses or anything like that in terms of, I mean, there's heat pumps, but we've run into, you found that there's some issues with those in an environment like Washington's, right?
Right. And in other parts of the state, like Eastern Washington, you have much more extreme temperatures, which affect heat pumps. If it gets too hot or too cold, they don't work as well. And it's a similar issue with electric vehicles, where extreme temperatures can affect the battery charges. So through all the confusion that's going on, what's certain is the 2019 law does not affect the ability of utilities to provide natural gas for heating and cooking. There's no ban on future use except through the Building Code Council. And the House Bill 1589 that's caused a lot of controversy it's merely a question of what PSC is going to do with these new provisions that it's being tasked with. Because it's not just the consolidation of the plans. There's other things that they're being asked to look at regarding electrification. So we're going to find out at some point as the planning proceeds.
Long after the laws are already on the books. So it's a matter of really saying, well, don't blame us. It's, this is long ago. This has already been in place for quite some time. What we're doing now is we're just following the law. Moving on, it might not be a widespread issue, but the issue of squatters' rights have gotten a lot of attention for the sheer audacity of it. The thought of illegally entering a property and declaring yourself the resident of the residence is hard to imagine doing. In Bellevue, a resident is seeing protests outside of his home for it not being his home. Capitol correspondent Carlene Johnson joins us. Carlene, this man and his family didn't technically illegally enter the property, but now it appears they're refusing to leave, correct?
Yeah, and this has been going on since early 2022. So over 2 years ago, a guy by the name of Sang Kim moves into a really nice house in Bellevue, $2 million home owned by an East Indian man by the name of Jaskaran Singh. So Singh rents Mr. Kim his house to live in. Kim shows, I make enough money. $400,000 income is what he put on the rental application. Family moves in, makes the first month's rent payment, and never made another payment. Just stopped paying. Now, we were still kind of in the throes of COVID, kind of coming out of COVID. And so people just stopped paying rent, right? We heard of that a lot. But in this case, the family never made another payment, despite the fact that Mr. Kim is still, we understand, gainfully employed. And he's purchased 2 very luxury vehicles while he's lived there. So he's still making some money somewhere, somehow. He's just not making a rent payment. And the homeowner has been unable to evict this tenant.
And so now you're seeing the property owner is taken to protesting and gathering crowds outside of his own, his property that he cannot rent out to anyone else. You've seen some of these crowds. It looks like they're getting pretty big.
They have been. There's been several of these protests, and the neighbors who, support the homeowner that want to get rid of this squatting tenant family have been out there as well. At times, some of it gets confrontational, right up to, following the squatter, Mr. Kim, up to the front door saying, who the heck do you think you are staying here? But because of a giant backlog in the courts and a group called the Housing Justice Project in King County now paying off the squatter tenants' rent bill, Mr. Singh has been unable to force his family out.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask, is why can't the property owner just call the police, say he's trespassing, get him off my property? I mean, it should just be that simple. But I guess you got to remember back during the pandemic when people lost their jobs and in mass because of the government shutting down many of the businesses that they worked for. You're seeing a situation where at that point, laws were changed to kind of add on really what we had seen from the Great Recession, where you had a change in state policy that extended out the foreclosure process to allow people to try and stay in their homes and get work again and make things right and find a way to stay in their homes and stay up to date with their mortgages. But at this point, it sounds as though this squatter, for lack of a better term, is leveraging all of the allowances that the state and local laws have given him to kind of milk the legal process.
I think that's a really fair description from the folks that I've talked to. Now, you've got the one conservative on the Metropolitan King County Council, Reagan Dunn, who's basically taken over this particular case and squatting in general in the county as the main focus of his office. When I spoke to him this week, he said, this is taking up all of his time, effort, and energy at this point. And one of the things he is attempting to do now is to audit the Housing Justice Project. That's the group in King County who, using taxpayer dollars to the tune of $88,000 and counting, is paying off this squatting tenant's rent bill. That makes it pretty hard then for the homeowner to say, well, this guy's not paying rent. Well, he is, thanks to the Housing Justice Project. But
right.
But Reagan Dunn's trying to find out, okay, wait a minute. Can they do this? Can they do this? This Housing Justice Project, like you say, was formed during the pandemic, like so many of these groups, to help people stay in their homes, to help, people make their mortgage payments, to help renters stay in their properties. But it sounds like from this case, this is being used in a way to pay a rent bill for a family that seems to have plenty of money of their own and could be paying their rent, but are taking advantage of a situation and using taxpayer dollars, to be able to stay in this $2 million really nice home in Bellevue. It's not a seedy rental property in the projects somewhere. This is a $2 million home they're squatting in.
Right. Well, and the thing too that surprises me is that with so many types of spending and grants and allotments, especially with taxes, you are means tested. Sorry, you can't get this tax break. Your income was too high. It shocks me that if this man is indeed making the money that, he's presumed to be, which we don't quite know. He's very tight-lipped about what he's actually making and what he's worth. Right. But I'm shocked that they would allow him to take advantage of this taxpayer-funded assistance to cry poor and stay in a residence where the landlord now, he's going years without having collected any mortgage payment or any rent payments to pay off. He could have a mortgage on the property. So he's just eating this cost and paying for a legal battle. But with all the levels of government in Washington, did Dunn bring up that this money could be better spent? It's not like, the state or the city. It's not like they're flush with money.
Well, exactly. And that is exactly what Reagan Dunn was saying. He said, come on, we've got cases where people really are, they lost their job or they, fell on a tough medical situation, whatever. And, people have needed assistance from groups like the Housing Justice Project. But in this case, it certainly seems that this guy is not the down on his luck, fell on hard times situation at all. The other issue, Cole, in King County Superior Court, there are only 3 commissioners per county by state law. So all of the counties in the state of Washington each have 3 commissioners to do this work, to look at cases where, okay, these people are what is called an unlawful detainer. They review it and they go, this guy's got enough money to be staying here or not. There is currently a 5,000 case backlog for illegal detainers just in King County. And according to the councilman, the county is getting another 600 new cases every single month in which landlords, again, just in King County, are trying to evict tenants who refuse to leave. And you've got 3 commissioners in the court trying to handle this backlog.
I honestly thought that it was a little less common, but that's shocking. It sounds like it's a real epidemic. Okay, thank you, Carlene. We will track this one as it moves forward and hopefully finds a resolution soon. Moving on to the U.S. government being called into federal court over a refusal to grant protections to gray wolves native to Washington and several other Mountain West states. Joining us all the way from Colorado is regional editor Derek Draplin. Derek, explain the issue at hand with this lawsuit.
Yeah, so first let me talk a little bit about current protections across the country. Gray wolves are currently listed under the Federal Endangered Species Act as endangered in 44 states. They're listed as threatened in Minnesota. And then there's the Northern Rocky states, which is an exception, where those states maintain jurisdiction. That includes Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, as well as Eastern Oregon, Eastern Washington, and I believe Northern Utah. Colorado's population is experimental because they're trying to reintroduce gray wolves there right now. But the lawsuit was brought in Montana by environmental groups and seeks to force the federal government to relist the species across those Northern Rocky states as threatened or endangered. And this comes after the Fish and Wildlife Service denied the same groups petitioned in 2021, and earlier this year, the service denied their petition to list gray wolves. But they did decide to develop a national recovery plan for the species.
Now, how many of these wolves are really running around the mountain states that you cover?
Yeah, it ranges. In Washington, there's several packs, but the total's around 200 wolves. Oregon's right under 200 wolves. Idaho has around 1,300. Montana has an estimated right around 1,000.
Colorado, though, recently, took some steps to bring more of these wolves into the state you mentioned.
Yep. In Colorado, in December, they reintroduced 10 wolves following a statewide ballot initiative to reestablish populations, although some had already migrated into the state from we think, Wyoming and Utah. But the Colorado's 10 wolves were sourced from Oregon, reportedly from packs that had a history of attacking livestock. And already in the first week of this month, April, we've had 2 different depredation cases in 2 different counties from the reintroduced wolves killing calves.
Right. That's kind of what I was thinking is, I had seen that the ones in Oregon had a history of violence against herds, and willingness to go and into places where humans kind of are around. I mean, these are big animals, up to 150 pounds. Have you seen any situations now of in Colorado, Washington, Oregon, anywhere else of, pets or other, neighborhood animals being killed?
Not recently, but I know that's happened. But any state that has established wolves is going to have cases of depredation, which when I say that, that's when a wolf kills or maims livestock or, house pets. And states will typically put together some sort of fund to pay ranchers market rate of livestock that they lost to the depredations, that typically through some sort of claims process. But it is taxpayer.
Right. And that was my question is, if you're a rancher and you see a pack of wolves going after your herd of cattle, what do? You can't you just sit there and watch it?
Yeah, it really depends on what state you're in. In Wyoming, wolves are designated as predatory animals and they can be hunted within a certain trophy game management area. But that doesn't apply to wolves that are found in national parks like Yellowstone or Grand Teton. But in Wyoming, the ranchers have every right to defend their livestock as they see fit. In Washington, a little different. Wolves are listed as endangered under state law in the eastern part, and they can't be hunted under any circumstances. The only case is a landowner could kill a wolf if it's caught in the act, and that rule is reportedly being under review in the state.
It's fascinating stuff. Thanks for joining us, Derek. We appreciate it. And it's now no secret that the city of Seattle is facing some dire financial challenges. The city's most recent answer to one area of need is similar to answers it's had in the past. That's to raise taxes. However, a new survey of taxpayers there hint that the famously progressive metropolis might be cooling to the thought that more money into the government will fix what ails it. Seattle reporter Spencer Pauly had this story. What is the question put to taxpayers this time around, and who sent it?
So the Seattle Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce puts out a quality of life index at a quarterly rate every year. This gets a feel for what Seattle voters are thinking, what their top priorities are and their biggest concerns. I can tell you in context that homelessness is a top concern for Seattle voters, but high taxes are within the top 3 as well. This time around, this survey asked the respondents to agree with one of the 2 statements. One statement, should the city work to offset the budget deficit, that is by reducing non-critical spending before considering tax increases? And the other saying, is it okay to increase taxes in order to address this budget deficit? Here the responses are, nearly 80% said the city should not increase taxes and should instead try to reduce non-critical spending. That is the big takeaway I've gotten from this survey.
And this is really bad timing for the mayor, right? I mean, after announcing what appears to be not only an extension of an old levy, but more money on top of that. So basically renewing an old levy and making it a good amount more expensive.
Yeah, I'm sure Seattle Mayor Bruce Harrell and his administration is looking at this survey and maybe having some alarm to it, because it was just last week he announced a transportation levy renewal that would be placed on this upcoming November ballot. This levy would generate $138.6 million annually for transportation projects. It's estimated to cost a median Seattle homeowner about $435 a year in property taxes for this levy alone. Kind of a high, steep price.
Yeah, when you put it in real dollars, that something like that, when they just say, well, $1.6 billion, well, that just seems like an unrelatable number. But when you say $436, to a family that owns an average home, not, some large compound out, in the hills or something, those are real numbers that people can really wrap their head around. The mayor, I'm confused, though. He previously said fixing the city's budget deficit with new or increased revenue wasn't on the table. What changed?
It's a little bit complicated. Harrell's State of the City address that he had earlier this year, he said no new revenues will not be the answer to closing the gap in the long run. Now, what this transportation levy does is it funds only transportation projects. Generated revenue cannot go towards the general fund in addressing the budget deficit. So even though Harrell has already promised that he will not put new tax to address this for Seattle residents, he is still trying to use tax dollars to fund new things, like a big infrastructure need that the city of Seattle has, new bridges, repaving sidewalks, street roads, whatever have you. So I think despite the fact that this levy renewal will not address the budget deficit, I think the survey here tells us that any new taxes, might be received with more groans than, approvals from the city of Seattle. And
it's important to note too, right, Spencer, that this is run, you have to consider the source of any poll. This is run by the Chamber of Commerce. So they're typically, they are taxpayers, but they're also business owners. And, the business community typically will try their best to fight back at increased property taxes, because that increases the cost of business, which then in turn increases the cost of doing business with that company via, pass-through cost. But my question is, though, how does Seattle compare to other cities in terms of the property tax burden, say median burden? Is there room to tax more, or are homeowners already paying quite a bit?
I have to defer to an article from the Seattle Times that was published earlier this year. The Seattle Times found that Seattle property taxes are the 5th highest in the United States. Seattle homeowners paid about little over $6,800 in property taxes in 2022.
Thank you, Spencer. I appreciate it. And a big thank you to all of our journalists for sharing their stories. Stay up to date with these and more at thecentersquare.com. I'm Cole Lauterbach, and until next time, this has been Washington in Focus.